Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Two Pence Worth. This is a series where we hear about the stories and successes, sometimes the challenges, but most importantly, the advice of female founders in climate tech. I got the inspiration to do this series when I heard a stat earlier on this year that in 2022, for every £1 of VC money that was invested, less than 2 pence went to companies with female founding teams. So I wanted to try and do my part to champion the incredible work that's being done out there by women in climate, to shine a light on their innovations, their journeys, address their challenges where there have been some, and share the resources and the tips that you can all then go on to use in your professional life. I know I've actually already been using some of the tips that have come up in some of the previous episodes, and I bought a book recently that was recommended to me by Josephine Bromley week before last, which I am thoroughly enjoying. So if you've missed any of our previous episodes, we've had some incredible stories from some great women in climate. Go and check those out either in video form on the Above and Beyond Recruitment YouTube channel or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And today we are joined by Marianna Herold of NatureBound. Marianna has around 20 years' experience of working in sustainability, focusing largely on sustainable supply chains, looking at minimizing waste, circularity, and carbon disclosure for huge companies like Tesco's, Cadbury's, and BT, as well as for one of the largest grocery chains in Africa. And throughout this, she travelled from London to Cape Town, wild camping in a Land Cruiser. I cannot wait to hear about that, by the way. Has co-hosted a mental health podcast and also run a business, a healthy treat business for families before launching NatureBound as part of the Carbon 13 Venture Builder at the end of last year. NatureBound is an observability, I'm never going to be able to say that, observability platform, which helps farmers to leverage their biodiversity data. So they integrate agricultural and biodiversity data from a huge range of different providers and then use machine learning models to help farmers to transition to more sustainable farming methods whilst also optimizing their yield. So I'm really excited to hear all about Marianna's journey, especially that bit about the travel. So thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. And that's great. I wasn't expecting to be talking about the overland travel, but yeah, we can talk about that.
Please do. I think it sounds fascinating. So we always start off, Marianna, by kind of looking at what you're doing now, right? So before we go back and discuss too much of the journey and your experience to today, I like to start off by putting a real kind of spotlight on what you're working on today, NatureBound, the platform, and yeah, just singing the praises really of what you're currently working on. So if you're happy to share with us a little bit more detail about that, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a really great summary and intro. Thank you so much. I don't even have all that much to add to that. But yeah, we registered NatureBound as a company in December 2022. We got some funding from Carbon 13 in January to help myself and my co-founder Gidi kick it off. So we've been going for about 6 months. And what we're working on at the moment is working on a demo version of our software platform and getting some users to test that. And that's kind of a big chunk of the work that I'm doing at the moment, is finding those people and hearing what their feedback is on what we're trying to build. We're also starting work with some farmers to actually look at what does this look like on the ground, what are their sort of needs and concerns around this type of data. And then obviously everybody's dreaded element, fundraising. This is a welcome break from a day of writing grants. Grants and then talking to investors is a big portion of what I'm involved with at the moment.
Perfect. Cool. And talk us through, so you mentioned there that you were founded through the Carbon 13. I sort of mentioned that in the intro, and we've had a couple of founders from through the program join us in previous episodes. But are you happy to kind of share a little bit about your experience of going through that program? How did you find out about it? What was your experience going through and meeting your co-founder Gidi as part of that and kind of getting this idea off the ground?
Yeah, sure. So what I was doing before this was I had a kids snacking business, which was kind of not related to the sort of sustainability background and the PhD that I kind of have in that space. I just wanted to do something completely different, and I wanted to solve a problem then for parents in that space. Many parents listening would know that kids are always asking for sugary treats, and that was what I wanted to solve. Sadly, that was launched just as the pandemic hit. So the costs spiraled completely out of control, and I decided to liquidate that last year. But what I really learned from that experience, I mean, a lot of things, obviously, but one of the things I really learned was that I love entrepreneurship. I love the excitement, the roller coasteriness of it. Not at all moments, but in general. And I wanted to do something that would then combine sort of my background, sustainability, with something entrepreneurial. And that's what got me to Carbon 13. So a mentor of mine in the food industry actually told me about it, and had heard about Carbon 13 from somebody who actually might be on this podcast as well. I didn't check. Frankie Fox, was she one of your
She's
speakers?
not.
Often, yeah, you should talk to her. She's amazing. But she told me about it, and it sounded like a great fit. So I joined in September. I met Gidi on the train to Cambridge. So he was the first person I met on the cohort.
So before you even went in, you met him. You met him on the way there.
Yeah,
oh, that's great.
On the way there, and we just really hit it off on like a really deep personal level. We ended up talking about all sorts of things like mental health, therapy, yoga, whatever on the way in, and really had kind of decided to be good friends instead of even exploring at that moment about being sort of co-founders. But we kind of bonded over a love of nature and biodiversity. And that's kind of how NatureBound sort of got its first idea. Because the food industry is the biggest destroyer of biodiversity in the world. But also, really interestingly, it's completely dependent on biodiversity. We need bees to pollinate. We need the soil microbiome to make soils fertile. There's a lot that we need from nature to create food.
And how much did the idea evolve, change from those kind of first seeds of you and Gidi talking and exploring this problem, and what sort of solution you could devise to where NatureBound is today?
It's a really good question, and it's always one of the things that's really hard is to remember what you kind of knew at different points, right? Like, and really sort of give value to how much your thinking has come along. But I think really originally, what were we attempting to do? Even I have to try and remember how much it was related to even agriculture just at the beginning. I think there's a lot that's evolved sort of in the last, let's say, 4 or 5 months, let's put it this way, around the business model,
right,
of how we can commercialize it. We always had the idea that nature data is very complex, and we want to find a way to sort of bring sense into that, which is kind of the data background that Gidi has as well. So that was kind of an original idea, but trying to figure out who would pay for that, and how can we make sure that we're actually having the impact. Has been something we've been really working on.
Yeah. Okay. And you said at the moment then the focus is very much on kind of building out that initial demo of the platform, doing some pilots and trials with farmers, and then that third piece around the fundraising that you're doing at the moment. What are you looking forward to? What does the kind of rest of this year and into early next year look like for you? And if you were to get that fundraising, what does that kind of unlock for you?
So very much looking forward to having an MVP out by early next year, so that we can actually start generating revenues. That's definitely, as the commercial person, one of the things really to be looking forward to. If we get that funding, I'd really be looking forward to having another member on the team, and being able to build that out. And that's definitely something I think we're both quite excited about and want the funding for.
Exciting. Cool. Well, I'll have my fingers crossed for you. And we talk often on this podcast about challenges, right? And the kind of the very fact that there's this 2 pence in every pound, meaning that, or kind of inferring, I suppose, that it is harder in some ways as a female founder or as a woman in business to kind of carve a journey or to be as successful, right? And so we do touch on some of those challenges, some of those discriminations, perhaps, that some women feel they face. But I know when we were preparing for this podcast, one of the things that you'd said is, I don't feel I've faced any huge challenges, but actually being a female founder has been a positive experience. So are you kind of happy to share with us a little bit about that journey that you've been on, through your early stages of employment, through your kind of first foray into entrepreneurship and up to now, and kind of give us a little bit about the kind of positive experience, as I suppose, that you've had as a female entrepreneur?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a bit of a funny one. I guess part of it is as well, I think a lot of it I think has to do with age. in my experience, at least. Sort of, if I think to sort of the beginning of my career in my early 20s, like the answer would be quite different in terms of how I viewed being a woman. I was working in a very sort of engineering heavy industry, and being a young woman in my 20s, being the only woman often in the room, there was a lot of sort of unwanted attention that would come from that. That's not really been the challenge these days anymore, but that was definitely sort of that colored sort of my perception of working life early on. But yeah, that was sort of in my 20s. I'm now well into my 40s, and I've got kids and things. And kind of why I wanted to say something positive about it was that I find that as women, we have a couple of things that make us really great leaders that I really value. And one of them is sort of the empathy and also the ability to juggle, which I think both things really get highlighted when you become a mother as well. And you've got this natural capability to put others' need ahead of you and sort of put yourself in somebody else's shoes because you're used to doing that with your children. But also that sort of juggling capability, I think, is completely fundamentally important as an entrepreneur, because you can go from doing one thing to something else, and that's your whole life is like that when you're a mother. So I think bringing those things are sort of a real positive thing. Of course, you can have those as a man as well, but I think that we as women have a lot of experience in those spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're completely right. I think that sort of ability to juggle definitely is really important when it comes to life as a founder, for sure. And yeah, I completely agree. I don't know if I would have been as competent a founder if I'd done it pre having children. I don't know, but I think you're right. And talk me through that kind of early part of your career journey then, because you did some fascinating things, even a very long time ago when I wouldn't necessarily have thought that big corporates were paying as much attention to the sustainability in their supply chain as it seems they would have been. But yeah, talk me through those kind of early days of your career, through working with all of those corporates and the supply chain work that you did, because that's really interesting.
Right. Let me try and remind myself about the early days of my career. So I started my career off in academia, which is I got a PhD in industrial ecology, industrial engineering, which was really much focused on sort of how companies report on sustainability, and this type of sort of supply chain dynamic was very core to what I was researching. What I did in those days was very much so selling projects to big corporates around sort of circular economy. Sort of first elements of that type of legislation were just coming in, and that's why I was working in that space, and that's what kind of drew me from sort of more pure supply chain management into sustainability.
Right.
But yeah, it was very much a male-dominated space, and I definitely had a lot of imposter syndrome back in those days, just being sort of 25 and leading projects and whatever. It's like I definitely struggled a lot with that. I did a brief stint in consultancy. Based on that, it didn't really work out all that well. I got fired from my job, and that was kind of when I went for that long drive through Africa as well.
Amazing. And that imposter syndrome thing, because I think that's something a lot of people can relate to, right?
Yeah.
How did you overcome that? Did you have any kind of coping mechanisms or ways of overcoming it that you kind of developed or learned over that time? Or was it just a case of, no, you just had to live with it and get through it, and over time it wore off? So
I think definitely not in that time. Like I burnt out when I was doing consulting. So I definitely didn't find a solution for it. I think it's much later that I've learned how to cope with those feelings, and I think it's experience that teaches you that, sadly. So it's not some kind of a magic bullet, but it's you come to realize at some point that everybody else is just making this up as well. and once you can grasp that thought, the whole imposter syndrome thing starts to disappear. I mean, it pops up in everybody's life still. I mean, I don't think anybody is really immune to it. Like it always comes up every now and then if you're in a space, like when joining Carbon 13, you're like, oh my gosh, these people are so, experienced. They've all got all this fascinating experience. And then you're like, but hang on, So do I, and and none of these people know what they're doing exactly either. So I think it's a lot of that realization. But I'm really passionate about mental health. I mean, I've just trained to be a yoga instructor, so a lot of the coping mechanisms come from that type of sort of philosophy and thinking as well. I practice yoga regularly, and then really big into meditation. And I think that practice really teaches me not to cling to negative thoughts. And I find that something that's really powerful in being an entrepreneur, but also in dealing with things like imposter syndrome, because you're learning that ability to let go of things. Whereas, you can get attached to the feeling of being an imposter.
And learning that kind of that balance and self-care and being able to kind of take a break to do something for you and
I know that there was a sort of thought on what tips to give to other people. Then I think definitely one of my top tips would be find something you're passionate about outside of work, and make sure that you're dedicating time to that as well, so that you're getting that absolute switch off, which is not just like a Netflix binge, but actually something where you feel like you're, a human being and, developing yourself. I think is really important.
Absolutely, something nourishing and something that takes an element, right, of kind of focus and mental attention, more so than a Netflix binge would, right? Because you're having to think about something and you're putting those thoughts somewhere else and not to work.
We're just talking about that Netflix binge and its uses and kind of, because sometimes it does feel just so overwhelmingly appealing to just stare at something for a few hours. But I don't feel like my mind is relaxed after that. Like I feel like I'm, vegetating, but it doesn't leave me refreshed at the end in the same way that having something like the yoga teacher training was for me, at least during this year.
Well, it's like the junk food of self-care, isn't it? The Netflix binge.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Enjoy it in the moment, but you feel a little bit grubby afterwards. And the yoga, was that something that you mentioned there, your experience of working in consulting and the burnout that you experienced as a result of that? Did the yoga and kind of mental health interest come as a result of that, or is it something that you've always been interested in?
Possibly. I mean, so that burnout was in my late 20s, so that's quite a long time ago already. And I've been doing yoga for maybe 10, 15 years. So I didn't kind of start it like right away. Okay. My reaction to the burnout was more, I don't want to do this job anymore. I want to do something else. And that's when we went to travel. So I traveled for almost 2 years. Just did some consulting work on the side.
Tell me about that. I'm so desperate to hear about that.
So we so the really exciting thing that we did was obviously drive through Africa. So we left London with a Land Cruiser, slept on the roof of the Land Cruiser, and drove all the way through Eastern Africa to arrive in Cape Town, which is where we moved to with my then partner.
Amazing.
That was an incredible way of seeing Africa, seeing the Middle East. I think often you see a lot of negatives looking at the news in terms of what people are like in these areas, and getting to be able to experience firsthand the hospitality of those places was just the most incredible experience, and sort of the humanity that we all share definitely changed my perception of the world forever.
It's amazing you said that, because my first question was going to be, did you feel unsafe? So clearly the opposite.
Yeah, no, we had our moments. I mean, we were camping in Syria in the desert, and we had the Syrian secret police come to interrogate us one morning. And that was definitely a moment of, okay, this could go pretty badly now. But overall, I mean, our biggest danger was definitely drinking too much tea at people's homes. Like, we had no car problems. We had one flat tire, and that happened like in a campsite in Uganda. So we were quite lucky in that sense. But like security wise, it was like unbelievable how accommodating people are, how friendly they are, and hospitable.
Amazing. And did you how long did it take to do the journey, and roughly kind of what route did you take?
So we drove a route that you can drive this now anymore. So that was in 2009. We drove through Syria, which obviously is not an option anymore. So we did Syria, Saudi Arabia. We spent quite a long time in Saudi Arabia, actually, which was incredible. And we drove across to Sudan, down Ethiopia, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, Kenya. Where did we go through from there? Yeah, we did Namibia as well. I mean, it's just incredible places. And it's even difficult to say what's your favorite, because that's often the next question, because there are just so many, different. So there's so many different experiences, and I don't know, being surrounded by wildlife is absolutely incredible. But I think the human contact still is what I enjoyed the most, like the sort of being invited into people's homes, regardless of whether they were living in a mud hut or even some cases in like a palace. But seeing kind of that was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that has kind of inspired, or I don't know, your kind of experience since in business and how you approach things, or not necessarily? I suppose it would be hard to tell, because you wouldn't know if you hadn't done it, right? But
yeah.
Any lessons that you learned from that in your kind of day-to-day life or in your business life at all?
I think it kind of teaches you, well, open-mindedness, definitely, and in terms of being able to deal with all sorts of different people. But there's also a certain resilience, I think, that comes through having done travel like that. And yeah, that I think comes through a lot of, dealing with a lot of adversity. I'm also a single mother, so having dealt with those types of experiences, I think, gives me emotional resilience in entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. And how, if you don't mind me asking, how do you kind of juggle that? Because that's a whole challenge in and of itself, right? Being a single parent and a founder. I mean, being a single parent and working full stop is a challenge, let alone being a founder, and a founder of a very early stage startup where, there's not a lot of contingency but beyond yourself and Gidi, right? It's you can't hand the work out to anyone else. So how have you managed that? And have you got any kind of tips for other women in the same situation?
Yeah, so I have to say that I'm quite lucky in that sense, that my ex-partner is incredibly supportive of what I'm doing, and he does have the children almost half the time. So that's kind of makes it actually easier for me than it would be for somebody who's got children full time, because half the time I don't have children. So half the time I can work long hours and, work in the weekends if needed. And I don't have that pressure all the time of having to juggle the kids. I mean, obviously that comes with its other negatives of missing them. But like in terms of working, it's actually an easier solution to not have your children all the time, which sounds a bit weird, but that's kind of how it works out as a bit of silver lining.
Yeah, I suppose you get those pockets of complete focus without them, right? Because I suppose if you have them at home all the time, but their other parent is there with you all the time, you get little bits, right, where you're juggling between you, so you can snatch an hour here, half an hour there between you. But I suppose, you when you're with them, you've got them 100%, but when you don't, you've also got 100% focus. So it's kind of, you can compartmentalize, I guess, a bit better.
Yeah. I mean, it's different, right? I mean, it just is. But yeah, like at the moment, they're away with their father for several weeks on holiday. So I'm leading a completely different life. Like it's leading, some kind of a 20-something, no kids type life, where you have all the time to go to these networking events without having to worry about getting home on time to, be there for bedtime and stuff. But yeah, when I have them, obviously it's very, very hands-on. But my kids are also a bit older now. They're 8 and 11. So they're starting to be a little bit more independent. So that the time with the kids is often, they can stay home alone for short periods of time, and, things have eased off on that.
Yeah.
Compared to previous experience of entrepreneurship when they were really young and I was doing the snack business.
Right. Yeah. So mine are 7 and 3. So I'm kind of at that. Okay. They can't act alone yet bit. Yeah.
Well, that's off to you. I don't know how you do it.
Lots of childcare. Perfect. So in terms of the sort of tips and advice section, as this is the bit I love and the bit I think gives people real value. What I ask people are kind of three kind of main areas, right? One kind of network, community, organization-based resource, one as a media-based resource, and then one as a role model. But on that first point, what, And you can give me more than one, actually, if you want to. So on that first one, what networks, communities, organizations, sort of people-based resources would you point people towards to help them on their business journeys? Or not even as a founder, just generally in their professional life?
Yeah, so if it's sort of related to climate, then the London Climate Connection, I think, is great in terms of monthly meetups for people who want to get into the space of climate or are already working on climate. It's quite a mixed group of people, but it's I think a really, really great initiative, and they have a wonderful newsletter that has all sorts of other events that are happening as well. So that's definitely one to subscribe to. Impact Hustlers, I've only discovered recently, but I went to one of their meetups, and that was also a really, really fabulous way of getting to know more founders in the space. In terms of women's things, there's a Female Founders Rise, which is a really great sort of, I've only joined it quite recently, but it seems like there's a lot of good quality stuff being shared there and events being organized. But those are probably my top 3 for that.
I've not heard of Female Founders Rise. I'll take a look at
Oh,
that.
have a look at that.
Yeah, I will. Definitely second the first 2. I've not managed to make it to any Impact Hustlers events yet, but I'm aware they've got a conference happening in October. Is it October or November?
What, is it a conference? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm quite new to that, but I went to one of their meetups and it was really, really lovely.
Oh, there we go. So yeah, Impact Hustlers, London Climate Connection, and Female Founders Rise.
Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Amazing. Perfect. And what about the media-based resources? So books, podcasts, anything like that you recommend?
So my favorite podcast is Outrage and Optimism. Oh yeah, I mean, you're in for a treat. It's absolutely lovely. So it's by Christiana Figueres, Tom Ribbick-Carnac, and Paul Dickinson. I used to work with 2 of them at the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is a not-for-profit here in London, and it's just amazing. I mean, it's an amazing discussion of everything that's happening kind of in the climate space, and they often have really interesting interviews. It's sort of my favorite podcast in the space.
Amazing. And it's an ongoing sort of weekly thing, is it?
Yeah, I think it is weekly. Yeah,
amazing. So what was it called? Outrage and
Optimism. So the idea is that every guest that comes on says something that they're outraged by and something that they're optimistic about and related to sort of climate.
Amazing. Yeah, that sounds great. I'll definitely give that one a listen. Perfect. And what about a business role model that you would suggest people follow? And it can be somebody that's in the climate space, could be somebody not, but yeah, who do you look up to, aspire to?
So I don't really have any sort of like leaders of businesses like that I look up to, but I do have, and this is quite niche actually, but related to kind of the sort of supply chain management space. There's a company called RELX, it's a unicorn in its own way, but like one that sort of optimizes supply chain management, which used to kind of be my background way back when, and people again I used to work with. But they've really made it big, and one of their sort of cornerstones has always been how they treat their staff, and just like they have that in all of their communication. It's just always this sort of flexible working and taking that to really the max. And there's something about that I find really great. They have their philosophy is just about this philosophy about kindness in general to customers and fun, and that's one of the ones that I probably follow the most closely to be inspired.
Oh, I love that. Do you know, you're the first person that hasn't given me a person, but has given me a business and a way of operating that they.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, I'm a big fan of the whole leadership team, but I know them from when I was working on my PhD. But they've really made it big. They're a global company. They're multiple times a unicorn by now. But I love following their posts because of the way that they approach building community and building sort of their workplace.
Yeah, and like you said, to have gone and had that huge success, but actually to have managed to maintain that kind of people-centric culture is not always easy to do.
Yeah. And I know that they've been like that from day one as well, that it's not like something they decided to add on after they all worked themselves to death. I know from having worked with them personally for several years that they were always people who left the office at 4 or 5 and went to do their hobbies and sports and, you know, cared about their families and stuff. And yet they've managed to build a really successful business. So that's something that Gidi and I both are really passionate about, as well as that work-life balance and mental health of a future organization.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to have our kind of role models in business that people can look up to that have been successful, but whilst maintaining an element of balance.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's so important, because we see so much of that hustle culture and you've got to grind to make it big, and to actually see examples of people that have been able to do it without doing that.
100%. Yeah.
So important. Oh, well, I'll go and check them out. Perfect.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Marianna. I've really enjoyed hearing about that journey that you've been on, hearing about what you're doing with NatureBound. And I thank you, and definitely for those resources, which we will share with everybody in the comments. So thank you so much for that.
Brilliant. My pleasure. My pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. Marianna, I wish you the best of luck with whatever the next few months brings for you, and with the fundraising efforts at NatureBound. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. We've got another few episodes coming at you. So we got about 4 more episodes in the series over the course of the next 3 weeks. So do tune in and join us. And thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.